Welcome to another episode of the Business of Speed podcast. I'm Steve Breitenstein here with Nick Bratton, and we are excited to kind of bring you another episode of this fourth season of the Business of Speed. We're in a good rhythm right now. I'm excited about kind of the pace we have and kind of the ideas that we're working through. How are you doing, Nick? I know we're not going to dive into this too deeply, but there was just some weather that came through New Orleans, and Nick, as a business owner, has been dealing with everything that comes along with that, and being a homeowner, and also in the real estate industry of renting properties. So he's got a lot on his plate right now dealing with the cold, but how are you overall?
Overall, I am good. Like you said, we'll debrief this in another podcast, but we just got 12 inches of snow in New Orleans, and it was 4 degrees, and so I'm still dealing with the repercussions of what happened 5 days ago. But yeah, we'll talk about that another day when I'm feeling a little better about it.
I think it's too fresh right now. It's too fresh. We don't want to get Nick all riled up. He's got things he's got to do after this call, so we can't get too crazy. But I know that we've been kind of talking about some different ideas around coaching and training as we're getting into this fourth season. And something that has been really sticking with me, I don't know if it's just how people go to certain coaching clinics and then start posting about the new ideas that they have, or whether it's just, man, we're blowing up certain themes around whether it's intensity, volume, strength training, speed training, what does it all look like? But I've been getting caught myself just reflecting on my past programming, how I visualized what a program needed to look like, what I thought was possible, versus my evolution as a coach and philosophy-wise. I've been kind of getting stuck on this idea of frequency and it being a underutilized kind of metric for programming. We get caught a lot saying, well, what's the intensity? What's the volumes that we're working in? The types of movement patterns. But we kind of have taken for granted that it either fits into a 3-day-a-week program or 4-day-a-week program. That's kind of it. Like, it's a push upper lower, push pull, whatever. And you have bodybuilding workouts. They're just singular muscle groups that maybe they get 5 workouts in a week. But really, as an athlete, you are training every single day because your sport is a stress on your body. And I've just been really curious thinking through my past programming and then what I'm actually doing with myself. And Nick, you were sharing some of the insights that come off of doing certain challenges, like a Squatober, and the perspective it gives you. So I'd love, Nick, like, what are your previous beliefs kind of that were ingrained around frequency, and what have you kind of been challenging that status quo with you and your staff?
Yeah, well, I think oftentimes you and I have talked about the evolution of a coach. And I think that this is part of that evolution, because when you first come out, you're so excited about all the things that you know and using all the things that you know. And then you get to a point where you start to believe deeply in certain things, and you start trying to find ways that you can start using those more often in a program, as opposed to once a training cycle or once a week or whatever it may be. I also, am really interested in this because, Steve, you and I have spoken all over the country on speed training, and inevitably every conference that I go to, one of the number one questions is, how often can I do this? How often can I do speed work? Or how often should I? How often should we sprint max velocity? How often should we do max work in season, or when we're getting toward the playoffs, things like that. So, we were talking before we started recording about some of the things that we're doing as a staff. And, I think within strength conditioning, everybody knows about Squatober. They now know about, Deadcember. We as a staff are doing a program that we wrote called Jumpuary. And so a couple of reasons why we're doing this. So, I had one, obviously, I think it's great team building. It's great for camaraderie. But I had a older client who's been training with us for 7 or 8 years now and very involved with the staff, ask, why would you squat every day? Why would you do this to yourself? And one of the things that I explained to him was, I think it's really, really important for our staff, because I have a lot of young coaches, for our staff to understand what it looks like to create a program that uses the same movement every single day. Not that we're ever going to write a program for a team that does that, but to understand what it looks like to use a movement in different ways. to use it from as far as different loading schemes, different set rep schemes, different intensities, different stimuli. We can use one movement for strength, but we can use the same movement for power and explosive work and different things like that. And so understanding how to create a program that may use the same movement but use it for different reasons. And it helps young coaches, and it still helps me today, but it helps coaches to understand, like, there are different ways that we can look at this, and it's not the same front squat for 5 sets of 5 and 5 sets of 3 and 5, 5, 3, 3, 1, and, doing the same thing over and over again, but looking at it from a different lens.
I remember I was influenced early on, but I thought it was just a crazy article, but it's come back, like you just read stuff when you're 20 years old, 21 years old. I'm sure it was a T-Nation article, I'll be honest, at this point, which I know is the most reliable source. But
yeah,
it was essentially to say, like, if I was going to offer you $1 million at the end of this month, if you could increase your squat by 50 pounds this month, they said, how often would you squat? Would you be okay to squat once a week and just hope that it works out? Would you be okay to squat twice a week? Or would you be trying to figure out a way to squat as often as humanly possible to really know that you were making progress towards it? And it was just kind of one of those questions that was out there at the time. I was like, man, that's so stupid. Like, you squat maybe 2 times a week. That's it. And you're heavily influenced in those worlds of powerlifting. And it's, well, we do squat day twice, or we do deadlift one day, bench one day, squat one day. But then I remember being influenced by Olympic lifting. That was kind of the first time I even really thought about I could do cleans more than 1 time a week.
Mm-hmm.
For a while there in the program, he's like, well, we do cleans on this day. That's our clean day. Well, if you're really doing an Olympic lifting program, you do cleans 3 times a week. The volumes are different. The intensities are different. One's more technical, but you're cleaning often. And especially if you're somebody that needs to get better at cleaning, you're definitely going to do it a while. And it kind of started this idea around, if I can connect the dot to say that this is a skill, whatever I'm trying to do, if this is a skill, is it going to be similar to if I'm trying to swing a baseball bat? Is it similar to trying to shoot a better jump shot in basketball? And if it's a skill that I'm trying to learn, like music, I was just telling Nick beforehand, no one ever recommends 1 time a week play guitar for 3 hours and you'll learn how to play guitar. No one ever recommends, like, swing a baseball bat 1 day a week for 6 hours and you'll be great at hitting a baseball. The general recommendation is 10 to 15 minutes every single day is going to make more of an impact than an hour or 2 once or twice a week. And the more I kind of relate these different ideas and movements and these kind of challenges that we come across as skills, I keep thinking, man, I want to do it more frequently. Mm-hmm. And I know that's carried over into my current personal workouts where, and Nick and I have talked about this, when you are an active person, but you are running a business or you're actively a father, a husband, it's hard to really just set aside time to crush yourself 2 or 3 days a week. Some weeks you have 5 days that you can work out and the next week you have 1. And so if you're writing a program that's like, well, I need 2 days to recover from every lift I do because that's how hard I go, it gets a little silly because then you're extremely sore while you're trying to coach and you can't really coach well. And you don't know if you're actually get that next workout in because kids might be sick. There might be facility problems you have to take care of, and that gets in the way of your workout. But if you're planning on, well, I'm going to work out every single day in some capacity, and I'm going to work my whole body every single day, if I have to miss a day, it doesn't really take away from the overall plan. I just kind of move along and get back into it. So what were some of your early influences on that volume idea, Nick? I'm always curious to hear, like, we start at one place, we move into another. Now you've been kind of challenging what programming can look like a little bit with your team, ideas outside the box. But what were those early thoughts from you as like a younger athlete, younger coach about what was right volume-wise?
Well, I think early on you just look at what you can get done in 1 day. Then in college and even post-collegiate, because I continued to run track after I was done collegiately, I was still working with my college strength coach. And I remember having weeks in the off season where I would have sets of front squat and back squat in the same day. and then followed up 2 days later by more back squat. And so it started getting the wheels turning for me of, I can do this same movement pattern multiple times a day and multiple times in a week. But also from a speed standpoint, because I have a little bit of a different background, I wasn't a strength coach who then started researching speed training. I was a track athlete who then became a strength coach. And so I didn't have the same thought process of strength coaches who were like, well, I can only do speed training one time a week. No, I was a track athlete who ran every day. I ran 6 days a week. But I also understood that we had high intensity days and low intensity days, technical days and volume days. And so I came into this knowing that a lot of my speed work was going to be predicated on what the emphasis was that day. And so looking at things like that, and then starting to follow other, obviously other speed coaches, Boo Scheck-Snader and Dan Pfaff, on the things that they were doing, but applying the same thing to what we were doing from a strength standpoint, understanding that there was carryover between both of those. So, Steve, I know that we alluded to it, but when coaches come to you and they have that question, how many times a week do you do speed training? How often can you do it? How do you address that? I know how I address it and how we do it within the facility, and I know that you and I have a little bit of a difference of opinion here, but how do you guys go about that?
Yeah, I think that my challenge to whoever is asking that question is in the realm to say you can't really overtrain, but you can definitely under recover in between workouts. And so that's going to be our guide for how many days you can train, is what are you really doing to make sure that you're prepared for the next workout. Mm-hmm. I would love you to be in here 5 days a week. If I'm seeing, I want to do something with you every single day because I know that's going to help. I would say if we can do minimum of 2 days a week, we know that we're going to make a difference in a reasonable amount of time. But if we can get you 3 or 4 days a week, and that's going to be consistent, and each day you're ready to train again, that's going to be where you really make some significant change in a really short period of time. So 3 days a week is what was always ideal for us. And that was mostly based on the fact that no one would take care of their body in between sessions. Mm-hmm. If they really could, and that's where I am now, is to say, like, man, if I could really just get somebody that really valued doing a little less each day, but getting themselves ready to come every day, that would be amazing because we could get so much built as far as that patterning goes. The hardest thing to do is see an athlete 1 or 2 times a week and think that we're significantly impacting their mechanics and we're significantly impacting the way that they're really performing movements in sport and competition. So that was always how I shared it with them. Like, if I can get you 2 days a week, there will be change. Yeah. 3 days a week, it's going to be in a better amount of time. But if we can find a way that you could come in every day in some capacity, we're going to make significant change in a really short period of time.
So with that said, because I've heard a couple of different philosophies, how would you design your days? Because I've heard some coaches say, well, you want to do your max velocity work on Monday or your first day of the week because that's when they're coming off the weekend. That's when they're the freshest. So you should be doing your max velocity stuff at the beginning of the week, your resisted type work in the middle of the week where they have a little bit of fatigue on the CNS, but you can still do some of those mechanical type things, and then save your technical work for the end of the week. But I've also heard from other coaches that, yes, they're fresh because they're coming off, and these are all track coaches. They're fresh because they're coming off the weekend, but they're dead. Like they're CNS, they're technically dead. And so you shouldn't be doing max velocity at the beginning of the week. You should be doing your technical work in the beginning of the week, your max velocity work in the middle of the week, because now you've woken that CNS up, and then save your resisted type work for the end of the week. So I guess what do you think?
I agree more with the latter version of that. Mm-hmm. And that's anecdotal and objective, is to say we tracked so many reps of so many flies and short accelerations, years and years and years of data. And we kind of came to that conclusion to say Mondays kind of suck. Like, they just don't come in primed up. And we kind of came to that realization on our own. I don't really know that we were really asking anyone about that. It was kind of like an internal conversation that we were like, why do we keep jamming them on Mondays to do flies and then the times suck? Like, every time they come on Tuesday and Wednesday, they hit better fly times. It's just what we're seeing every single time. And after we kind of had that question, then we went and asked a few people. And I know Dan Pfaff and Altus and Stu McMillan, they were right with us. They're like, oh yeah. They're like, Mondays are terrible. We use that as a priming day. And we were like, all right, well, that definitely makes sense, reinforcing what we were seeing. And we were like, well, we were thinking about doing a little bit of top end speed exposure, really focusing on like a good acceleration day technically, but not fatiguing. And especially when we had like our combine athletes or somebody that could come 4 days a week. Because we're like, all right, well, they're going to come Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday is going to be our hard training days. And that was what was really ideal, was like a priming version of a training day on Monday. And then Tuesday, really get our max velo, and then some solid, maybe resisted accelerations. Then come back a little bit more on the technical side Thursday with our velocity work, go a little bit heavier on accelerations. And then we could either have a extended acceleration and then actually start to talk about conditioning, the 4-letter word, but conditioning as how that applies too. And to say like there's so many different options to just build up capacity that, you know, if we have actually a full week, it fits really way easier into what we're programming then. It's hard to program one when you only have them 2 days a week. You have to sacrifice something. But that was really our layout, was an acceleration priming day, but we still touch everything. That was the difference that we came to, was that we touch everything, even for change of direction included in this. To say like, not even for just a track situation, there was some change of direction on each one of those days as well. And the heaviest change of direction day was going to be at the end of the week, when we were kind of, like we said, you're going to be a little fatigued from the overall volume of training by the end of the week. And so change of direction for us was so much more of a technical type exercise. It didn't require actually that full engagement of the rhythm of running at full speed. So your body could kind of fight through that in a fatigue state. So that was kind of my answer to that one. Throwing it back on you, Nick, what would be ideal for you guys?
Well, you know, I would agree. We would be the same way. You know, we're a little bit different from the standpoint of, you know, there's so many factors that have to go into it. Are they in season? Are they out of season? Are they a linear athlete? Are they a multi-directional athlete? We tend to have more designated days where we have just a linear speed day, just an agility day, and we do that for the logistics of the facility. But typically we have that first day of the week as a linear speed day, but it is going to be either resistance focused or deceleration focused. It's not going to be a max velocity day. Then their second day, they'll go into, if they're a linear athlete, their max velocity work. If they're a multi-directional athlete, their agility work. And then that day 3, if they're a linear athlete, it's a technical day. If they're an agility athlete, then they're going to get into some of that max velocity work. And so, you know, setting it up like that, it's funny talking about this because, you know, I'm reflecting back on my college days, and I don't remember this specifically because this was 15 years ago, but I do remember that our track coach would have us do, you know, more of the short-sighted acceleration work on Mondays. Those would always be our 30s, 60s, 90s, wicket runs, things like that. Tuesday would be a very heavy volume day. So as a 400 runner, those would be my 450 days, my 350 days, my broken 400 days. Wednesday would be a multi-circuit, multi-lift, multi-jump, things like that. Then Thursday, we would come back with more of our max velocity work. And then Fridays off season would be hill sprints. Fridays in season would be more, you know, pre-meet type things. But it's funny as we talk about this, I'm thinking back to what those workouts looked like. And you know, our coach had a fairly similar, even though he didn't have any type of physiology background, he had a fairly similar setup to it. And so it's just interesting to think back on those things now.
Yeah, some of that intuitive coaching, you know, those coaches that really were able to see what was happening with their teams, make adjustments to what they were just seeing and saying, well, you know, like they seem to be running faster. They're not complaining about being tired and sore as much when I change this up. They're not getting injured. You know, like there's so many of those things for coaches that didn't have analytics. They didn't have athlete management systems back then. They just had some notes that they had. They were making some calls sometimes intuitively to say, well, if we train like this, it really has minimized X, Y, and Z as far as what I perceive as happening. So I think it's a pretty good plan I'm going to go with.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to adjust this, and this. And also, I'm always impressed with a coach like that because there was a lot of secrets as we go back in the day, coaching wise.
Yeah.
Nobody was it wasn't like they were going to conferences every week and listening to podcasts. The coaches were sharing what they were doing. They had to figure a lot of this out on their own, or
Yeah.
if they were lucky enough to have a mentor, or if they purchased a VHS series and somebody said something that was helping them in that way. But it was hard to get information.
Oh yeah, I remember going to track meets, and our coaches wouldn't even communicate with coaches from other teams within the conference. I mean, there were even times where we would have to do our warm-ups in private because coaches wouldn't want other coaches to see what we were doing from a warm-up standpoint. Like, coaches, they used to hold on to content and information so tightly, when at the end of the day, we were really doing about the same thing regardless. But yes, people used to be so protective over what they did.
Yeah. And I think that's a big shift in our industry,
Mm-hmm.
but the shift away is some of that intuitiveness to really lean into that view of coaching, and I think that there's something to be said for even what you were describing around the fact that you were essentially training your lower body every single day. Basketball players are training jumping in some capacity every single day. They're training sprints and accelerations every single day. And so I think it's always challenging when you're working with that type of athlete that all of a sudden you have a program where they just do accelerations one day a week and they do cutting one day a week.
Well, and it's so interesting that you say that. I just saw a story about Morant and his dad basically saying, I think this was on ESPN yesterday or whatever, but saying that he did jumps onto a tire and he would do 600 to 900 reps every single day. And there's video of it, of him with a tractor tire jumping onto the edge, jumping into the center, and basically doing like a depth jump, quick jump out of the center, back onto the side of the tire. And his dad talking about how, we would do basketball drills, and in between every drill, he would go over, and we would average 600 to 900 jumps every day. And again, you talk about maybe frequency is a little more important than what we're actually doing. Maybe the fact that we're just doing something is better than detailing the exact thing that we need to be doing. Because at the end of the day, maybe 600 to 900 reps is way more important than the 4 sets of 4 box jumps we're doing because we don't want to fatigue them. He wasn't worried about that. He just wanted his son to get better, and that's all that they had access to. And so, I've heard the same analogy. A coach was talking about training the ankle complex and the Achilles tendon, and him explaining, like, you take 10,000 steps a day. You really think 4 sets of 20 calf raises does anything for you? You really think that jumping rope for 5 minutes does anything for you? You took 10,000 steps today. That's nothing. And so, just understanding that we don't necessarily have all the answers yet, and we're still trying to figure it out. But we're getting closer and closer every year.
Yeah. I just got sent an article around the NBA leaning into some biomechanical analysis tools, and different companies are going to be heavily involved. Four kind of trials are going to be happening in the NBA where they're going to put in a whole lab dedicated to evaluating movement patterns to really help with injuries, because they're so worried about what rates are going up. And I responded to the person that sent it. I go, cool idea, maybe 25 years behind as far as the idea of it. But also, I'm curious to find out if the results, quote unquote, are pretty much intuitive, or they are really altering what we now know about what's causing injuries. And my gut, to a degree, says we have a bunch of athletes playing the sport a ton, but the frequency that they're actually getting stimuluses to improve their bodies is going down. As we talk about, man, they're kind of beat up, so I'm just going to do a little recovery day that's going to be stretching because that's what they need. Or, they're sore during the season, so we're just not training, and to say, well, maybe it's because we are going too high on intensity, and so they can't handle that, but the frequency is too low to really build up any sort of change, because we're talking about, well, we did some lunges one day a week. Well, they just did 7,000 accelerations over the course of the week. Do you think your 3 sets of 6 lunges made a difference for that?
Yeah.
I think it challenges what I traditionally believed.
Yeah.
I was, contrary to what you shared earlier, Nick, like I was heavily influenced by the world of like bodybuilding and powerlifting and basketball to say, well, you do jump training a couple days a week, maybe that's all you need. We go in condition all the time. But so my view on it was different. Like we tried to kill ourselves every workout and then would not train for like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And say like, all right, well, it's time to train again. Now I can't walk for 3 days. That was perfect. And so my idea of what training looked like was completely different, but the skill piece was every single day.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a day that went by that I didn't shoot a basketball, dribble a basketball, do quote unquote conditioning for basketball. That was every day, but it just was a confusion of where the value is at.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't want to get into the injury rates in the NBA because I have my own opinions on this, but I do think the commissioner came out a few days ago or maybe last week, and he did mention, he's like, when we look at the injury rates, we should also take into account all these guys who play for the USA team, all these guys who play for the national team, and how little they get injured, but the guys who take the entire off season off, how much they get injured. And, how low the injury rates were years and years and years ago, and how high the injury rates are now. And we're so worried about how much time they have off and how long the off season is and, all these other things, when at the end of the day, maybe we're just not playing enough,
Yeah.
So, but again, that's for another episode. But yeah, I did think that was interesting.
I can't wait to have that one. It'll just be Nick Bratton's soapbox.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to it. And I know that this idea of frequency is not brand new. I think leaning into it is, but I think it applies across our businesses and in our leadership as well, where there's so many aspects of running your business where so many people say like, well, we have meetings. Well, we have one meeting a week that's an hour and a half long. Well, yeah, that's important, but that is a possibly intense meeting that accumulates 90 minutes of it. But what would make a bigger impact on the individuals you're meeting with? How frequent can you have those touch points? Or we have a 2-hour meeting every 2 weeks. Again, intensity's high, volume's high, but the frequency is so low, you're missing out on the message maybe sticking. You're missing out on opportunities to correct more frequently to make sure that that behavior is actually optimized. And I know, Nick, you've shared how the regularity of your meetings is really making an impact with your team.
Yeah, we made a really big change here in BSP a couple weeks ago. Before I had BSP, before I worked for the Pelicans, I worked for a hospital provider in Indianapolis, and we had a ton of meetings. We had meetings every single day. And it was very frustrating as a professional in those, feeling like nothing was ever being communicated, and we were meeting to feel like we were busy and to feel like we were getting something done. Then working in the high school setting, same thing, dealing with the school system, having meetings just to say we had meetings in order to get state funding because we say that they're professional development days. Yeah. And so I've always been of the thought process of, get rid of meetings. Don't have them. They don't push you forward. And then realizing over the last 6 months that our lack of meetings was actually hindering us. We would have one weekly meeting where we tried to squeeze in as much information as we could. And then throughout the week, we would try to get whatever other work done we could and communicate in offhand conversations. And so what I realized is, as this business is continuing to grow, we've been open 8 years. We've seen double-digit growth every single year, with a couple of those years being almost 50% growth. We've grown really, really quickly. And we've gotten to a point where we cannot continue to grow at this rate without having better, more consistent communication. And so at this point, our staff actually has 3 meetings per day, every day. Now, not everybody on the staff is in those meetings. On a Monday, we may have a team meeting where everybody is regrouping, and then an intern meeting where myself, the internship coordinator, and then the content curator is in on it. And then on Tuesdays, we're meeting about our apparel, and it's just myself and one other individual. And then we're meeting on our team training, and it's myself and our team representative. And so, just knowing who's in those meetings, and I've communicated with our entire staff, it is okay to say, we don't have the content to have an entire meeting today. Let's do a 5-minute check-in and let's move on. Yeah. So we don't need to feel like we need to hit some time quota. Let's communicate the important information, and then let's move on. But let's not allow ourselves to not have these touch points and then allow something to fall through the cracks.
Yeah, I love that. And, that's one of the challenges I think for a lot of leaders is balancing having an open door policy, or to say like I'm overly engaging with my staff and it's taking up too much time. The open door policy is never going to be fully utilized. It's a failing strategy, because if you feel that you're busy as a leader, your staff feels that you are extremely busy.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden they start shying away from wanting to engage with you because they say, he's busy. I don't want to try to add something to his plate, so I'm not going to bring it to his attention. And then something falls through the crack. You're like, why didn't you tell me about this? You're so busy. Well, I have an open door policy. Okay, well, that's where it just broke down and failed. The thing that I have preached so often was, for the staff that I was leading, similar to what Nick is describing, is to say, I'm allocating these windows. I'm protecting these windows of time. We don't have to fill every minute of that window, but I'm protecting it, and it's here if we need it. But if it's a 5-minute conversation and it's done, excellent. Then we have 55 minutes to get ahead of something.
Yeah.
If it was 15 minutes, we got 45 minutes to get ahead of something. If it was a full hour conversation that was needed, thank goodness I protected that full hour, because we were able to make a difference. And that frequency is what really reinforces that you're not just communicating information to your employees. You're not just communicating info to maybe your clients, but you're actually trying to connect with them. And that frequency is more of you're connecting with people, and that's the text, the language you use in that can be different too.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I'm realizing, and Steve, you've known the whole time, is when people can expect those meetings, they start thinking about them ahead of time and they start bringing content. Instead of me calling a meeting and me having all the content and me drowning everybody with that content, and then them just trying to absorb it, when they know that a meeting is coming, they bring their own conversation topics. They bring their own ideas. And then it's not just me exhausting myself trying to fill this 30 minutes with content that everybody else is trying to catch up with me in my thought process. It's no, as a team, we're actually coming together and we're bringing all of these ideas in. And so, again, I think it's one of the best things that we have done. And I'm really enjoying it. It's giving me an opportunity to connect one-on-one with everybody as well, which I think is phenomenal. And again, I think that it's only going to accelerate our growth, because now, because we are communicating so often, I can completely take my hands off of things and allow people to run and do what is probably a better job than I ever would have been able to do with the 5% of bandwidth that I was placing on a task, because now they're placing 30 to 50% of their bandwidth on it.
Yeah, I think that's so awesome. And if anyone's listening and they're getting inspired and getting fired up and they're like, man, I got to get back into this rhythm of meeting. If you're unsure of how much time you should have allotted for that meeting, if you're unsure if that meeting hit the mark, I still do this. Every time I have a meeting, I reflect on that meeting afterwards to say, like, was I able to add as much value as I wanted to in that meeting? What was the experience for the people in that meeting with me? Was it the experience I was hoping they would have? And was I hoping that when they left that meeting, this was going to happen? And so if I hope it, then I need to make sure that I'm making that happen. I need to plan. I need to adjust. I need to feel what connects with the people in front of me. Like Nick said, they get more excited about it. I ran those meetings that were, one was X's and O's and one was just life development. And I had to make sure at the end of it, people were excited about coming to that meeting next week. I never wanted anyone to just dread that there was a meeting on the schedule and just be like, oh God, here we go. Like Steve or Nick, they're going to get on their soapbox. They're going to dump a bunch of info. They're going to tell us we got to do this and got to do that. Yeah, it's the same stuff every week. Some of it is going to be repetitive, but I want it to feel like they are actually connecting with what is being shared in that meeting. And they're bringing their own ideas that they can be heard as well.
Yeah, I love that. And last week you and I had talked about kind of creating goals and strategies as far as getting into this new year. And one of the things that I've started doing is having a running list of every meeting, things that we talked about, how it relates to our goals, how it moves us toward our goals. And so for me, it gives me an opportunity to reflect every single week on, okay, is this meeting worth it? Is it moving us toward our goals? Are we meeting on each goal, or is there a meeting each week that is at least talking about some of these goals that we've had outlined?
I
So,
love that.
Steve, I think part of being a good leader is being able to recognize when maybe we're inundated with some of this information or some of this content. And so I guess as a leader, as a coach, sometimes you go into these meetings. I can tell you as a college professor, sometimes I go into class and I speak for an entire hour and the facial expressions don't change at all. It's like I'd rather talk to a blank screen. But how can we, as a leader, as a coach, as a mentor, recognize when maybe we're doing too much, maybe there's too much content, maybe there's too many meetings, maybe there's too much going on, and I need to pull back a little bit? What are some things that we can look for? What are some cues?
Man, Nick, I think you nailed the first one with what you just described. If you're speaking, you're sharing with your staff, and nobody is leaning in, that's when I would immediately just pause whatever I was saying mid-sentence and just address that and lean in with it.
And how would you address that? What, is there a certain question you'd ask?
100% is to say, like, hey, are you guys connecting with what I'm saying right now? Is this because a lot of times when we're speaking, we tend to speak at the people in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
And especially as a business owner, you're thinking about the business and what's best for the business. That's just what's on your brain. Your staff isn't necessarily worried about the business.
Mm.
They're worried about them, where they're at, what is going on in their life, and then a little bit of what they're doing and how it relates to the business. That's just kind of a fact of it.
Yeah.
It's like kind of always saying, like, if you're expecting all of your employees to care as much as you do, you're setting yourself up to fail and just be disappointed. And so the idea of, I need to pull them in. And what is the simplest way to pull in your team, to pull in anybody when you're talking to them, is to start with a story and create it in the language of a story that is what we're about. It's not just facts, and I'm just communicating information to you. It's always about the story of what they have personally described they want for the future. The story of what they've told me they'd love for our facility to be. It's always about that story, and I'm pulling them back into that story. And I'm using a story maybe as a anecdote for what we're going to lean into today.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many stories you have as a coach that can apply to pretty much anything that happens in life. But when you tie that next bit of information you want to get to about a NBA athlete you worked with, that they know that person's name, everybody leans in a little bit more, versus when you say, hey, good to see you. I know it's Monday. It's our state of the meeting for the week. It's a State of the Union address. Here's our list of things we got to go through today. All right. Everybody tell me a win. Everybody has a win. Cool. All right. So we got wins. All right. Here, what do we have this week? Who's talked to so-and-so this week? It just becomes a list.
Yeah.
And that's where we lose people.
Yeah.
Is we take a little less intentionality to say, the thing that is going to connect everybody is if I can bring this into a story that they're a part of, and I go back into that story, and I use the language that I know excites every single person. That's where I've gotten to know everybody individually. So I'm using language. I'm using examples that I know is going to pull each one in at different moments. And now I'm gauging their engagement the whole time. Who's leaning in? Whose eyes are fixed on me? Who's taking notes on things? Who's not? If they're not, why aren't they? What's going on with them? I'm going to call them out on it. Hey, I noticed you're not really writing any of this down. Which part is kind of like missing the mark with you? It's okay. Because again, if I'm doing that on a very frequent basis and we're having conversations frequently throughout the week, they know I care. They know I care about them. They know I care about where we're taking this thing together. And it doesn't feel like you're just being judged the same way as if we just have one meeting a week and all of a sudden I'm trying to call you out in that meeting. I don't talk to you the rest of the week.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I start with every single time.
Yeah.
And I adjust the same way you would with an athlete. Like the same exact way. If you have a plan that you're getting your athlete warmed up and they are just not engaged, what are you going to do? just keep running that same workout plan, or are you going to ask them some questions? Are you then going to try to modify the plan if they need to have the plan modified a little bit to make sure that it really fits what they need that day? Because that's what we're trying to do, is make sure it's fitting what they needed that day from that meeting to help them be focused with us so we can achieve what we need to achieve together.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
There you go. So I look forward to hearing some feedback from the listeners about what we talked about today. I'm curious. I made a post a couple weeks ago around volume, intensity, and frequency, which is the hardest to really program and control. And not surprising, based on what we talked about today, the responses I got were frequency. It's
Mm-hmm.
the hardest one to try and program and to really control. Is I just don't know how often I need to do these things. And so I'm looking forward to hearing some of those people after we had this conversation today to lean in even harder, and let's put some ideas together. Let's challenge what the norms are around frequency in training, frequency in our business. Who and what can we be doing more often, and who can we have conversations with more often to really make our business take a jump start here?